Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. There were a lot of big moments last night for day one of the Democratic National Convention. President Biden received a rousing standing ovation, as a matter of fact, several, as he spoke about his accomplishments while passing the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris. Well, tonight, former President Barack Obama is the headliner under the theme, A Bold Vision for America's Future. So what's your assessment of the first night, and what are you hoping to see and hear tonight? My guests are Ebony McMorris, White House correspondent for the American Urban Radio Network, and Ray Baker, political commentator and labor advocate. Thank you both for joining the conversation. I just will start with you, Ebony. You're there. Kind of tell us what the mood was last night, and more generally, just what are you seeing and feeling even during the day?
You know, it's funny. I'll even start from when we first got on our flight, because leaving from BWI, we were on the flight. I saw Officer Harry Dunn on our flight and was talking to him. You know, what are you expecting? How are you feeling? He was talking about how the campaign has been asking him to speak different places. He was just in Milwaukee. And my first question to him was, you know, we see what's happening in Atlanta with these board officials not wanting to, may not certify votes. And he was talking about January 6th might just have been like a ground floor for what we may see coming in. He said, but I'm hopeful. I got to get this message out. On the flight, you could see that everybody on there was headed to, it was like Soul Plane. Everybody was headed to the DNC. Getting on the ground, we saw traffic everywhere, of course, but there was just a palpable energy in the air that is feeling like a shift. I don't like people using the word honeymoon, because I don't believe that's what the moment that we're in, because I believe this is bigger than Harris, and I believe this is actually bigger than Walz. But then touching people individually, when I'm doing interviews with various congressional members or just everyday people, my deeper question is, what is it you specifically want to see connected to this? While you are happy about this energy, what is it that you want to see, and what has been affecting you the most? Economics has come up. We've seen the protests outside of those for the war, against the war, those feeling like they need to support Israel, back and forth. And even some that I met that were from Michigan that were like, yeah, we did the protest vote. I believe they felt that through this ticket we could advance more, but I want to hear and see more of the conversation. So there is a level of expectation that is in the air. I believe it's different than we saw when we saw Obama become president. The hope and change message. I think with his presidency, people had high hopes, but I think people need to still be engaged and put pressure. Just because you see black on the ticket does not mean that you don't put pressure, you know? And so honestly, it was they've been using the word joy, and I will actually say over hope, I will say joy is what you felt in the air. And also people now in many areas saying, I need to get more involved. I need to become more civically active in this, because I think one thing about this election is people have understood more how local politics, state politics really affects them even more, because we've seen what's happened. I know Ray will pick up on this, what we are seeing happen with the courts. Like, it is a continuum. You can't separate this out at all.
Ray, I'm sure you watched President Biden's speech last night. Give me your assessment.
I think that President Biden is receiving the statesman's farewell. He's being acknowledged for his leadership of the country at a time in 2020. We cannot forget the immense tension around racial violence from police. We cannot forget the crippling effect the pandemic had on our actual lives, on our economy, on the ways that people experience the world. And because President Biden had not presented himself as a candidate that would energize Americans to push back against the threat that we perceive Donald Trump to be, he stood to the side. I think broadly people recognize the humility and the reason necessary to do that. Now, Whether he stepped aside for his own humility and whether he reasoned this, whole different conversation. But the fact that he did demands that we who appreciate him doing that then give him the hero's welcome, if you will. And so I think what we can expect, much like famous basketball players like Kobe Bryant, may he rest in peace, when he decided it was his last season, every time Kobe went to another arena, those fans in that arena gave him the farewell because of what he meant to the game of basketball. As President Biden said in his speech, I have given you the last 50 years of my life. And whether or not folks have been supportive of Mr. Biden for those 50 years or not, he has indeed committed 50 years of his life and in many ways sacrificed time spent with family. We know about the tragedy with his children, the younger child that died in the car crash. We know about the son of his that suffered from cancer. And we know about the anguish that it must be as a parent to see a son who has substance abuse problems and who quite honestly may be an embarrassment on the family name. And so we see that President Biden is now being feted in a way that communicates the public has an appreciation for what he's done. As a senator, his career is long, and quite honestly, for me, has places where I would disagree with it. But as a vice president, then president, his career, interestingly enough, has been bookended by history-making African Americans. Whether we're talking about President Obama, picking him as his running mate, or whether we're talking about he as president, picking Kamala Harris as his vice presidential nominee. So I think yesterday what we saw was an opportunity for everybody involved in the Democratic political apparatus to simply say, thank you.
Ebony, what were the nuggets for you outside of President Biden's speech? Whose speech really made you sit up and pay attention?
Man, it was mixed. So I'll say this: it was long. It was.
Yes, and certainly, and
I don't like to harp on it because I know people like it was too long because that wasn't it. Because I heard someone say, "Let me tell you something. This man gave his farewell speech. Let that man say what that man wants to say. Let him do it. He did it. He did it well. Like I was clapping. Like yes, the totality of his life, like Ray was talking about, and so it was good for me. I'll tell you what I liked. I loved AOC's speech. And that's an interesting dynamic because she's, part of the progressive side of the party. So it's interesting to see that. I'm going to be looking for later, side note, how that progressive movement now comes into this, which we see VP Harris, people call her a left, but I don't think I see her actually more moderate in many ways. How that goes together. But I enjoyed her speech from the beginning when she started immediately talking about how 6 years ago she was taking omelet orders and her family was struggling with bills. Her father had died. She had no insurance. To me, that is the American, that's my cousins and them. You know what I'm saying? Like you can relate to that story. And when she was saying it, I was like, man, but now I see that you are here. That is a 6-year difference. Another great point for me was seeing Reverend Jackson come out on that stage. I didn't need any words because for those of us who understood what it meant when he ran and to see how far we have come now just sent chills to my body. Anytime anyone revoked the name of Shirley Chisholm, it wasn't even a long speech. It was some of the symbolism. I'm not heavy on that, but that moment last night was. Then seeing Representative Jasmine Crockett on that stage, who we know comes up with it quick. But tear up when she talks about how VP Harris had a moment with her and encouraged her. And that's why we see her where she is. It's the drops where you see everyone mention the impact that VP Harris has had on their lives. And for whether people like her, don't like her, to have the story where people been talking so much trash, misrepresenting your record, debating whether you should be in it, should not be in it, calling you the DEI candidate, and calling you every name in the book, to then step on a stage and have the momentum that she has is crazy. It was even good to see Hillary Clinton. Secretary Clinton spoke in a way that I never really have connected with her. I think I was connecting with
Mhm.
leaders who I hadn't always connected with when they spoke. And so for her to talk so glowingly about VP Harris, and when you see her, that's how we got here. That's how we got a Trump. You can't see Clinton without thinking about Trump.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering in my mind, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
Because I want to say what she wants to say to America, but America voted for her, and she said that 66 million votes, which
Mhm.
points to the work we need to do with the Electoral College. Like, there's some other issues that we have to address. I enjoyed though, but to me, nothing beat Biden's speech.
Mhm.
Everything to me from the start, from seeing Mignon Moore, and then chair of the DNC, Jamie, the whole thing for me as a Black woman, and then talking about reproductive rights every time I heard that, it just it was just a great moment. Everything.
Let me say, when I was watching last night, Ray, when Jasmine Crockett walked to the microphone,
You knew you was ready.
I'm sitting in my living room with a great big 75-inch TV, and when she walked it onto the stage, I said, "Oh, here we go." I said it. I said the quiet part out loud. I said, "Here we go." Let us just say, Ray, that alliteration lives.
I
And
mean, yeah,
What did she say? Vile, violator, vile, something. Vile, you vile, violating something. Vile, violating villain, I think.
yeah, that was a great. Jasmine Crockett, Jesse Jackson.
Bring up the t-shirts.
Yeah, because I was in college in 1984 when Jesse Jackson ran the very first time, and of course Raphael Warnock.
Yes.
Ray, does it get any blacker than that when you're talking about the culture? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that the DNC did a very good job of tapping into the Black Americans who have worked diligently and gotten themselves into positions of some name, stature, and or power in the American political establishment. But a little bit of a conversation that I'm bringing a little bit of behind the scenes to the audience here that we were talking about is that, Ebony, you know this from your work in and around the community about interviewing folks. The good thing about Ebony's work is she's a White House correspondent, but she's a White House correspondent who understands Main Street. And one of the things that I appreciated from last night was that labor leaders were speaking. And of course, I appreciate that. I'm here as a labor advocate, admittedly. And the thing that I think is valuable about labor is that we saw that Teamsters president Sean O'Brien spoke at the Republican National Convention. He was the only labor leader to do so, while not acknowledging that Mr. Trump habitually underpaid or did not pay his workers or contractors that would build some of the places, right? He regularly did not acknowledge some of the impacts that the tariffs that Mr. Trump proposes would have on regular working people, particularly those of us who may be out of the trade community. So when you see leaders from LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, when you see a Black woman, to your point, Ebony, April Verrett, the new president of the SEIU, when you see Claude Cummings out of Houston, an older Black man, steeped in their AFL-CIO and NAACP, the president of the Communication Workers of America, when you see Lee Saunders, the president of the AFSCME National Union of Public Employees, when you know that AFT, 1.8 million public employees, was the very first labor union to formally endorse Ms. Harris when she was then announced her candidacy. I think that inviting labor, when you have the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, who comes
Hold that
out of
point,
the
Ray.
Chicago Teachers Union.
I hate to cut you off. Please do not forget your point, because I'm going to let you continue on the other side. We're going to take a quick break. Don't forget, you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Quiet Storm is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about Democratic National Convention Week. We're looking back at day one last night, or some would say this morning, because it certainly did stretch into the wee hours of this morning. And we're previewing day two. We continue our conversation with Ebony McMorris, White House correspondent for the American Urban Radio Network, and Ray Baker, political commentator and labor advocate. Ray, please continue your point that you were making before the break.
Yeah, just to wrap that up, the mayor of Chicago is Brandon Johnson. Brandon Johnson's political base is the Chicago Teachers Union. Chicago is one of the few places in the United States where being a labor union and being a part of a union really carries political weight. And so one of the things that you invited us to think about before the break was what might have been most impactful. And considering the ways that President Biden and Vice President Harris can point to so many accomplishments legislatively that they have done that positively impact people's lives, yet so many of the people that, Harold, you talk to when you're engaging them in the community, Ebony, who you engage with when you're outside of the White House, and that I happen to represent on the labor front, don't feel those policies, right? So the disconnect between the public policy and the impact that it has on people is a bridge that needs to be closed. And it was heartwarming and at least a source of optimism to see the Democratic Party trying to use the labor movement to help bridge that gap. Now, whether that's going to be effective, that remains to be seen. And I think that's a lot more work for political organizers to do. But I do think that it was valuable that the same way, Harold, you alluded to how much the culture was represented, labor communicates how much working people are represented.
You know, one of the things that I was acutely aware of last night were the optics, and realizing that, you know, in the audience, even in some of those far-flung, and maybe I shouldn't even call them far-flung, because I don't think that would be appropriate. But I think in those states that are not on the coasts, the states that are not in the Northeast, the states that are not in the South, the Midwestern, you know, that breadbasket of America, you still had so many people of color, and, you know, from other states that are not typically associated with, you know, the Democratic brand. And when you're looking in the crowds, I mean, you know, you see this tapestry, Ebony, of Black folks, brown folks, young folks, old folks, very, very different from the RNC.
Very different from the RNC, but I'll also say, even a lot of times when, even on the Democratic side, when we talked about rural America, sometimes we don't always see brown America, but they are very much a part of the story. They are, I mean, shucks, we could do a whole show on Black farmers, really. Black land, our migration goes right through all of that. And so I think you're right, and I hadn't really thought about that as much until you just said something. But I think it means that that this story that we have must be even more inclusive, even from the ads that we show. It means that the conversations that we have for Black America cannot be about inner city or this or what's happening there, but understanding how much Black folk are a part of the very fabric, the very making and creating, the very cultivation of this country. And you're right, I met people from all over who normally on a typical day I'd be like, oh, Montana, oh, it's Black people in Montana, you know.
Exactly.
but we have to understand, and I think the that is what some don't want, that is the connection that you see people not wanting us to have, because from there, and I don't want to get off topic, we can then have a global conversation about how we are all connected and understand the power that we really truly have. But you're right, there were people from all walks of life here. I've talked to more veterans here than I have talked to before about the issues that they are also going through. I just I cannot wait to see what happens after we leave Chicago, and even starting with the story of Chicago, right? I mean, how do you talk about Chicago and many don't even know that it was founded by John Baptiste Point DuSable, right? And there's a whole museum dedicated to that and about his Native American wife. Really, I feel like that's where the story should start. However, that's interwoven into this. And then we get these Chicago men coming out, like a Jackson and Obama. The tapestry, like this quilt of who we are and how expansive we are, is amazing. And the truth is, most of us don't know it.
Ray, I want to talk a little bit more about Hillary Clinton's speech. Not so much her speech, but what happened during her speech. You heard the crowd chanting, lock him up," in reference to Donald Trump. President Biden has been one not to really approve of that chanting. He's tried to steer clear of that. He's kind of tamped it down. Obviously, Donald Trump supporters, when talking about Hillary Clinton, would chant "lock her up." This was during 2016 and even 2020. Do you think she should have tamped that down? Your thoughts about that? Because it's not. I don't know whether that's a good or a bad. It's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. The reason it's a tough question is because Michelle Obama famously said, "When they go low, we go high," right?
Yeah.
And we saw how effective that was for policy in 2016. The Democrats lost. And here, modeling rather than after Michelle Obama, but after the rapper Kendrick Lamar, by calling your opposites weird, look how well that Democrats are doing. And so the United States unfortunately rewards and incentivizes negativity, nastiness, violence, power. Might makes right. The conflict in Gaza right now is being determined by who has the bigger weapons, who has the most power. And so if our country is a place that loves vengeance more than justice, and you are in search of the country's approval, then it may behoove you to lean into vengeance. What does that mean for your own morality? I imagine each of us have to make that decision ourselves.
Yeah. I think that was well said, and I think also the profundity of that statement really paints the difference between where the two parties are right now. Where on one hand, and this is not me. I mean, this is this is Donald Trump speaking from the podium, talking about vengeance, and you have Kamala Harris and others talking about the joy of it. When you're talking about Tim Walz as the happy warrior.
And
it's hard to say. It's hard to say, Ray, how that is going to how that's going to play out. But I will say from experience, being in Cleveland on the floor when Donald Trump gave his acceptance speech in 2016, and many people said that was a very, very dark speech. Nothing has changed from 2016 to 2024.
Well, Harold, real quick, and that's Ebony, before you jump in, let me just remind our audience of this real quick. The vengeance and lust, while the Republicans wear it proudly, Democrats also embrace it. And that's some of the disconnect that the apathetic non-voting to voting swing voter for Democrats goes through, because it feels dishonest. One of the reasons we know it feels a little dishonest is because, Harold, I was out reporting for you back when Osama bin Laden was killed, when President Obama was the president. I was out getting sound right in front of the White House for you. And there were
Mhm.
people climbing poles, cheering, waving their shirts around. You would have thought that Steph Curry just hit a game-winning three to give the USA men's basketball team the gold medal. And so, unfortunately, while Democrats may acknowledge violence or might or retribution as something that they do begrudgingly, their audience and the public also sees it as we want vengeance. And so this notion of vengeance being greater than justice, sadly, seems to be very American, and it invites all of us individually to name our loyalties, whether it's to vengeance or to justice, and how those things may be different.
Go ahead, Ebony.
I was thinking of, made me think of, and I think I mentioned this last time I was on the show, Kevin Phillips, who was one of the architects, of the Southern Strategy, told a journalist about the Nixon 1968 election. He said the whole secret of politics is knowing who hates who. I absolutely agree, Ray, with what you said. I think that what we saw with the Trump administration is what many people thought that they wanted to see. And I say that because they wanted to see someone who's going to come in and we have this tell like it is, say what we want to say, speak off their dome. He's everyday people, and you got that. You got somebody to speak off your dome. They use words like bigly and greatly that with no subject noun agreement, who literally like bathes in racial stereotypes, who has said what many people wanted him. I mean, there was no quiet part out loud. Trump just said what he said when he said it, and people, we have this culture that loves this tell him off, write it off, but there has to be a level of decency. And people have been missing that. And the Republican Party, I will say, who pushed it, who backed it, who tried to explain it, who tried to mansplain it all day long, now are, like we saw in Arizona, like, okay, wait a minute. This is getting to be a bit much. That's crazy. And that doesn't mean your policies are changing. It just means Trump is doing, that's another conversation, just doing too much. I think America has just been tired of it. I mean, he traffics in it. We saw what happened on social media. It is worn down the American public. I have enjoyed seeing how Vice President Harris responds to some of these attacks. And I hope that the response many times, well, especially when she said, say it to my face, but then it is, let's talk policy. Because I believe that the bar has been low for President Trump. He hasn't had to really come. There's been no push to make him really give policy. They explain away everything for him. But now that we see the polls are tightening, now that we see that there's been a shift, how will he respond to this moment? We've seen him hold this two long press conferences, and there's really been no policy responses, just more creative names that this time are falling to the ground and are not really bearing any type of fruit.
Ray, let me talk a little bit about the war in Gaza and what we are seeing, outside, and also, Ebony, certainly I'd love to hear about your observations. But what do you think needs to be said this week at the convention, Ray, about the war in Gaza? And do you believe that Kamala Harris should say something about it in her speech? And if so, what should she say?
Should, Harold, should. You asking that should question. Friend, that's why I get to have the title labor advocate and not Democratic nominee for president of the United States. As an advocate, I can absolutely say that that Vice President Harris should say the Biden-Harris administration will currently cut off weapons supplies to Israel so long as Israel are attacking civilian facilities, as we have evidence of them doing. Since we have evidence of them doing, starting immediately, effective immediately, we will no longer ship weapons to Israel in this matter. That's what Kamala Harris should say. Can she say that? No. And when I say can, I don't want to allude to a nefarious cabal that is holding her hostage or anything to that effect. I am saying that the United States, for its own issues, desires, and will, wants Israel to be a global strong point in the Middle East off of the coast of the Mediterranean Sea in order to secure United States shipping interests, in order to secure United States real estate interests, in order to secure United States weapons interests. And when I say the word interest, for those listeners who may not be as sophisticated as you, Harold, or you, Ebony, may be, I quite honestly mean money, right? The business opportunities, the opportunities to make money in those places. And so, literally, it is bad for business for Vice President Harris to take the most humane stance possible. So what then are we left to conclude about our elected officials, but more so about our electoral system, when the thing that is the most humane position is bad for global or national financial interests? So what should she say, referencing the violence in Gaza? Because I don't object to you using the term war, Harold, but I it's a very, very lopsided war, you know.
That's very
and so
true.
when the scoreboard says 40,000 on one side, whether the 40,000 are civilians or enemy combatants, and it says 1,100 on the other, that's real hard pressed to call that a war. That's not to mitigate any of the terror, the violence, or harm any of those folks who were affected by the October 7th violence had to experience or endure. What it is to ask us to consider is vengeance versus justice again. And so when Vice President Harris takes the stage to give her remarks, you ask, what should she say? Well, there's a whole gamut of things that she should say that would serve the humanitarian interest, but they would not be for her best interest to become president of the United States. As she told protesters several weeks ago when they first interrupted one of her early rallies when she was a candidate, if you want Donald Trump to win, just say so. Yeah, because apparently the options are in a two-party system: vote for me, who will not take the most substantive steps that are available to me to end this horrific violence, or vote for this other person who won't even attempt to end the horrific violence or won't even give lip service or gesture to it. So I think that our vice president, if she does share the same humane leanings the three of us share, is very much stuck between a rock and a hard place.
What have you seen, Ebony, when, coming, to the convention center, obviously seeing on TV a lot of police presence? Things got a little more muscular yesterday during the protests, the reinforcement of some barriers yesterday. But even as you were going through, what were your impressions?
Well, first of all, I believe it's an issue. We've heard the vice president come out at times a little bit, seemingly taking a stronger stance. I do want to start by saying that she is still the vice president. So what you are not going to see is her step in front of anything that President Biden is doing. You're not. But you are also people asking the legitimate question of what is it that you will do once you if you become president. We have seen part of her 100-day plan, but nothing concerning that. It's been domestic issues concerning working families. I don't think you're going to hear anything really come out of her besides what she has said, which I feel like, to her credit, even some of the statements that she has said condemning I know it's one thing to condemn, but condemning the Palestinians that have been senselessly killed. I feel like her voice actually on that has been stronger than what we have heard out of President Biden. Now, at the convention, there were some delegates who want the party to call for the arms embargo. That's been a huge cry. Even in talking to those who I meet on the street, that's one demand that people have been saying. We hear now, I think this morning, it's been busy on this side, hearing that there may be some type of, we've heard this before, peace agreement put in place. It depends on what Hamas is saying. But I do also feel like one thing she has been trying to do is separate in people's minds Hamas and everyday Palestinians. I do feel like, though, I would love to hear, I don't think I will hear, I would love to hear in any remarks in the future Vice President Harris talk about the origins of this and not start from October 7th. I think we do the American people a disservice. We are really not honest, because if we do that, I mean, there weren't just those out there, I will say, marching for for the lives of Palestinians, but there was also groups that I saw that were talking about, why are we not talking about Sudan? Why are we not talking about what's happening in Nigeria? Why is this? Why are we not talking about places where there's an even greater humanitarian crisis? That's something that you don't really hear at all. There were small groups talking about that as well. But to be honest, when it comes to international relations and policy, I think the U.S. has a lot of apologizing and explaining to do. So I'm not going to put it. I don't think that you are going. I'm curious to see what the messaging will sound like if Vice President Harris assumes the presidency, and
Mhm.
how hard. I'm also curious to see how hard progressives will begin to lean in on her when it comes to this issue of what is happening.
Harold, real quick, I'm sorry to jump
Go
in,
ahead.
Harold, but I'm thinking about what Ebony said earlier in the program when she said the value of electing Vice President Harris, should she be, or when President Obama ran, is that you got to still keep pushing at that particular elected official. There seems to be an unresolved tension from the supporters of those elected officials, though, of, why are you beating up on my guy, my girl, my whoever? They just got in. They've got the Republicans to deal with. So-and-so caused this problem. And those things may all be true, but the whole notion of an active and engaged democracy is that the public uses whatever means they have, ideally nonviolent, to press decision makers into the will of the public. That's the theoretical idea behind a democracy. And what seems to get lost often is the public is not merely our business interest, but very much the humane interest of so many of us. Ebony asked, well, how come we're not talking about other humanitarian crises across the world? Because that's ain't where my money is.
Right.
And
yeah.
sadly,
Yeah. And I would say, to your point, they're all fans of Janet Jackson. What have you done for me lately? When we help get you elected, we'll give you a day to hang the curtains, but then let's get to work. What is former President Barack Obama's job tonight?
Well, first off, I'm very surprised that for as popular as former President Obama is, as well regarded, and if you listen to some of the whispers, Ebony, you might know a little bit better than I, President Obama was the one who put his finger on the pulse that said, okay, it's time for Mr. Biden to step aside. I'm very surprised that this convention being in Chicago, him being a history-making president himself, is speaking on day 2. So, considering some of the people that they have coming after him later in the week, if I'm not mistaken, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker is going to speak later, or speak tonight, if I'm not mistaken, because he's with all the other Chicago folks. But I was very surprised that Bill Clinton will speak later in the week than Barack Obama. And that was curious to me, because, and now I'm about to get into a little bit of the messiness that is outside of politics. But, hey man, there are some whispers that the Obamas and the Harris tribe aren't necessarily, they're aligned, because who's not aligned standing against Trump, but they don't have the warmest relationship in the same way that perhaps Obama and Biden does, or the same way that Biden and Harris does. And so what I expect to hear from President Obama is the tenor of, we're better than that, right? Because that generally is his national ethos. We are better than that. How do we know we're better than that? Because I come from Hawaii and I'm welcome to Chicago. We're better than that. How do we know we're better than that? Because my dad is black, my mom is white, and everyone loves me the same. We're better than that. And I do think that President Obama sincerely believes America is that good. Unfortunately, I don't think President Obama knows much of the America that the three of us might know.
Ebony? the look on your face.
I can't. So what I will say. So what I do know, let me put my journalist hat right back on. No, but I absolutely hear what you're saying. I think behind the scenes, even in just go back to the Obama administration, there were always questions about how good are these relationships that we are seeing. I'm glad that some of it doesn't always spill out so much like we have seen on the other side. But to that point, I think when that was a good point about why are we seeing him on day 2. I was going to ask you, Ray, actually, do you think there was question about how come we hadn't seen Obama come out and support her earlier? I knew that was going to happen. I think we see President Obama has usually always played the safe bet. I think we were going to wait to see how the delegates looked first, see what the count was going to be, and then he was going to come out. I don't feel like he's changing his stripes in that way. He's always kind of played that safe round. That's fine. So be it. But I was going to ask you in return, do you think that Harris needed an Obama? Like, I kind of know the answer, but I'm curious to see what other people think because that momentum went so fast. As far as tonight, though, we are going to see him. I think the theme for tonight is laying out a vision for America.
Let me just suggest this. I'm not surprised that he's speaking when, I don't know, why tonight instead of tomorrow night, or why he isn't introducing her, all of those things. But one commentator said last night, I believe it was on CNN, that the worst thing that you could do, I'm paraphrasing here, is follow a Raphael Warnock. Okay. Because Chris Coons, the senator from Delaware, followed Raphael Warnock. You can't follow an old time Baptist preacher from Ebenezer, Martin Luther King's church, and then you bring a white guy on to you can't do that. And so suffice it to say that Barack Obama is the Democrats' great communicator, better than even a Bill Clinton. I don't think you want. Look, I'm just saying.
What does that face, Ray? What?
Bill Clinton did his thing. Let's be clear. But what I'm saying is better for Barack Obama to start to do Tuesday so that we don't have him overshadow Kamala Harris on Thursday.
The Democratic Party seems to disagree that he's a better communicator than Bill Clinton, but I'll let you take it up with them. So your point about
I said, and you got 2 great ones.
Yeah, certainly. And to your point about you don't want to follow Raphael Warnock, I'm certain Chris Coons doesn't, but I wouldn't mind. Right? Like if you are like Harold, you wouldn't mind either. If they told me that you were speaking after Raphael Warnock, I would go, oh, 2 very dynamic speakers. I'm excited. Right?
But the only thing that the 3 of us have in common with Chris Coons is bald heads. So
certainly. And that's why I'm thankful this is the audio medium.
Right, exactly. Well, actually, our listeners and our viewers will be able to see this on YouTube, on our website, on WHUR.com. Ray, I'm going to give you the last 15 seconds since we started with Ebony. Is tonight going to be better than last night? What do you think?
No, I'm excited about tonight. I think that the Democratic Party, to Ebony's point, has done a great job of highlighting the symbolism and diversity of the United States. You see turbans, you see women, you see folks in wheelchairs and crutches, you see LGBTQIA+ community, and whether or not that is just symbolic or actually indicative, it speaks a lot louder and more clearly than the folks we saw earlier this month.
There you go. Ebony McMorris, Ray Baker, thank you so much for your input. Looking forward to last night. Get out the popcorn. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, August 20th. I'm Harold Fisher.